When I came home from my 3-week contract job in Tulsa, I expected Eleanor to run to the door like she always did. Instead, I found my wife sitting silently in her chair, staring at the floor, and the moment I saw her face, I knew something was terribly wrong. Eleanor had always been full of life, but now she looked weak, frightened, and almost like a stranger. Our garden, which she had cared for. When I saw Marisol enter our house on the recording, I expected to see her helping Eleanor with groceries or checking on her as I had asked. Instead, she walked straight into the kitchen and looked around as if she owned the place. She opened the refrigerator and removed several containers of food before placing them into a bag. Then she walked into the living room and told Eleanor that she needed to stop talking to the neighbors. Eleanor looked confused and asked why. Marisol told her that the neighbors were gossiping about our family and that they could not be trusted. I watched in disbelief as Marisol slowly isolated my wife from everyone around her. In another recording, I saw Marisol standing over Eleanor while holding a stack of papers. She told Eleanor that I had sent them from Tulsa and that she needed to sign them before something happened to our house. Eleanor refused at first. Marisol became angry and told her that I was planning to leave her. My hands began shaking as I watched the recording. Then I saw Marisol place a pen in Eleanor's hand and point to a document. I paused the video and called our attorney, Carlton Pruitt. I told him I believed someone had been manipulating my wife while I was away. Carlton told me not to confront Marisol yet and to preserve every recording. I continued watching. A few days later, Marisol returned with another folder. This time she told Eleanor that the money in our checking account needed to be moved because I was supposedly hiding it from her. Eleanor looked terrified. Marisol then made her sign a document that gave access to our account. I immediately checked our bank records. My stomach dropped when I saw a $22,000 retirement withdrawal that I had never approved. But that was not the worst part. Another document showed that someone had opened a $40,000 home equity line against our house. Then I found paperwork claiming Marisol had a financial stake in the property. I stared at the documents in disbelief. She had not just frightened my wife. She had been trying to take our money and our home. And I knew I had to find out exactly how far she had gone. The more records I checked, the worse everything became. The $22,000 withdrawal had been made from Eleanor's retirement account while she was frightened and confused. The $40,000 home equity line had been opened using documents she did not fully understand. Then I found something even more disturbing. Marisol had filed paperwork claiming she had a financial interest in our house. I looked at Eleanor and asked her why she had signed anything. She started crying and said Marisol had told her that I was going to leave her and take the house with me. She had convinced Eleanor that signing the papers was the only way to protect herself. I felt my anger rising, but I knew yelling would not help. I asked Eleanor if Marisol had ever threatened her. She stayed silent for several seconds before finally saying, "She told me nobody would believe me if I told them what she was doing." That sentence broke my heart. My wife had been living in fear inside her own home. I called Carlton again and sent him copies of the bank records and property documents. He told me we had to move carefully because this could become a serious financial abuse case. He asked me whether Eleanor had ever recorded any conversations with Marisol. I told him I did not know. That evening, while searching through the house, Eleanor suddenly remembered something. She went into the bedroom and returned with a small digital recorder. She had hidden it inside a drawer because Marisol had made her nervous. Eleanor told me she had started recording conversations because she was afraid she would forget what Marisol had said. I pressed play. At first, I heard Marisol speaking calmly, telling Eleanor that Hollis had found another woman in Tulsa. Then her voice became colder. She told Eleanor that if she refused to sign the papers, she would lose the house and end up alone. Eleanor began crying in the recording, and Marisol responded with words that made my blood run cold. I looked at Carlton and said, "Now we have her voice." He listened carefully and then told me something I never expected. "Hollis, this recording could change everything." The footage showed Marisol walking into our house with a completely different attitude than the one she used around Eleanor. She immediately closed the curtains and locked the front door. Then she went into the kitchen and opened our refrigerator. I watched as she removed several containers of food and carried them outside. My hands tightened around the remote. A few minutes later, she returned and began telling Eleanor that the neighbors were talking about her and that she should not trust anyone who came to the house. Eleanor looked frightened and kept asking when I would return. Marisol told her, "Hollis is busy with his new life in Tulsa. You need to accept that he may not come back." I felt sick listening to those words. But the next recording was even worse. Marisol was standing beside Eleanor's chair, holding a small bottle in her hand. She poured something onto the chair and then quickly wiped her hands. I leaned closer to the screen. I could not see what the substance was, but I knew something had been deliberately placed there. Then I remembered the title of the message Eleanor had been too afraid to explain. She had mentioned that something happened to her chair while I was away. I continued watching. Marisol later returned with paperwork and placed it in front of Eleanor. She kept telling my wife that she needed to sign because I had supposedly given Marisol permission to handle our finances. Eleanor refused at first. Marisol became angry and started threatening her. She told Eleanor that if she did not cooperate, she would make sure everyone believed she could no longer take care of herself. I stopped the recording and looked at Eleanor. She was crying silently. I asked her how much paperwork Marisol had made her sign. Eleanor whispered, "I do not know, Hollis." But she took me to the bank. That was when I realized this had gone much further than emotional abuse. Marisol had been trying to get control of our money. I opened the next recording, and what I saw made my stomach drop. It showed Eleanor sitting at our kitchen table, signing a document while Marisol stood behind her. The date was clearly visible. 3 days later, $22,000 had been withdrawn from our retirement account. The $22,000 withdrawal was only the beginning. I pulled up our bank records and found another transaction that made my blood run cold. Marisol had opened a $40,000 home equity line against our house. Eleanor had apparently signed documents she did not fully understand, believing Marisol when she said everything was temporary and approved by me. I asked Eleanor why she had signed anything at all. She started crying and told me Marisol had threatened to leave her alone if she refused. She had also told Eleanor that I had already decided to sell the house and move to Tulsa with another woman. I felt furious, but I forced myself to stay calm. I knew anger would not help Eleanor. I needed evidence. I went through every document Marisol had brought into our home and discovered something even worse. There was paperwork claiming that Marisol had a financial interest in our house. She had been trying to create a legal path to claim part of the property. I looked at Eleanor and realized how badly she had been manipulated. Marisol had not simply taken money. She had slowly convinced my wife that she was abandoned and powerless. Then I noticed something strange in the security footage. Eleanor had been carrying a small digital recorder in her pocket during several of Marisol's visits. I asked her about it. Eleanor hesitated before telling me she had started recording Marisol because she was afraid nobody would believe her. We listened to the first recording together. Marisol's voice came through clearly, threatening Eleanor and telling her that nobody would believe. An old woman who was confused and frightened. Then came another recording. This one contained something far more serious. Marisol was discussing our retirement account in the house with someone on the phone. She said, "Once Hollis comes home, it will be too late for him to stop us." I looked at Eleanor. She looked back at me with tears in her eyes. For the first time since I returned from Tulsa, she looked less afraid and more determined. We now had something we had never had before. Proof. I knew we could not confront Marisol yet. If she realized we had discovered the truth, she might destroy the evidence or try something even worse. I called our attorney, Carlton Puitt, and asked him to come to the house immediately. I showed him the bank records, the home equity documents, the security footage, and the recordings Eleanor had secretly made. He listened without interrupting. When the final recording ended, he looked at me and said, "Hollis, this is serious. But you did the right thing by keeping the evidence." He explained that we needed to protect our accounts in our house before making any move against Marisol. Carlton contacted the bank and placed restrictions on the retirement account and the home equity line. He also began the process of challenging every document Eleanor had signed under pressure. Then he called Deputy Reyes from the Elder Fraud Unit. I told her everything that had happened while I was away in Tulsa. She came to our home that evening and carefully reviewed the recordings. One recording made her stop the playback. Marisol was clearly threatening Eleanor and telling her that Hollis would never believe her. Deputy Reyes asked if Eleanor was willing to give a formal statement. My wife looked at me and nodded. For the first time, I saw the fear in her eyes being replaced by courage. We gave Deputy Reyes copies of everything. She told us not to warn Marisol and not to contact Daniel yet. They wanted to build the case quietly. The next morning, Marisol called Eleanor as if nothing had happened. She asked whether Hollis had discovered the financial paperwork. Eleanor stayed calm and answered exactly as Deputy Reyes had instructed. After the call ended, we realized something important. Marisol still believed she was in control. She had no idea that the people she had tried to silence were now gathering everything against her. But Deputy Reyes soon discovered another transaction, one that could prove Marisol had planned this long before I ever left for Tulsa. The footage showed Marisol entering our house with a bag of groceries, but instead of putting the food in the kitchen, she carried most of it back outside. I watched in disbelief as she removed several items from our refrigerator and placed them into her own bags. Then she walked into Eleanor's room and began telling her something. Eleanor looked frightened and kept shaking her head. Marisol stood over her until Eleanor finally signed a document. I paused the recording and felt a wave of anger. I asked Eleanor if she remembered that document. She covered her face and started crying. She told me Marisol had said the papers were only temporary and would protect our finances if something happened to me while I was away. But they were not temporary. When I checked our bank records, I discovered that $22,000 had been withdrawn from Eleanor's retirement account. Then I found something even worse. Marisol had opened a $40,000 home equity line against our house. She had also filed paperwork claiming she had a financial interest in the property. I could hardly believe it. While I was working in Tulsa to support our family, Marisol had been quietly taking control of everything we owned. But the security footage showed something even more disturbing. On another recording, Marisol blocked our neighbor from entering the house. When she came to check on Eleanor, she told the neighbor that Eleanor was sick and needed complete rest. Then after the neighbor left, Marisol locked the front door and told Eleanor, "Nobody needs to know what happens in this house." I looked at my wife and realized she had been living in fear for weeks. But Eleanor then reached into a drawer and pulled out a tiny digital recorder. She looked at me and whispered, "Hollis, I knew you would eventually come home." So I recorded everything. I took the recorder from Eleanor's trembling hands and pressed play. At first, all I heard was Marisol speaking softly, but within seconds her words made my stomach turn. She was telling Eleanor that I had found another woman in Tulsa and that I was planning to leave her with nothing. Then Marisol said she could help Eleanor protect the house, but only if Eleanor signed the papers she placed in front of her. Eleanor asked if she could call me, and Marisol immediately threatened her. She told Eleanor that if she told me anything, she would make sure the whole family believed. Eleanor was confused and unable to manage her own affairs. I looked at my wife and realized how terrified she must have been. We listened to several more recordings, and each one revealed something worse. Marisol discussed the $22,000 withdrawal, the home equity line, and even talked about how she could eventually claim part of our house. Then we heard her speaking to someone on the phone. She said, "Hollis will not know anything until it is too late." I felt my hands tighten into fists, but Eleanor grabbed my arm and told me not to confront her. She was afraid Marisol would destroy the evidence or try to hurt us. I agreed. Instead, I called our attorney, Carlton Pewitt, and asked him to come to the house immediately. When he listened to the recordings, his expression became serious. He told us that what we had was far more than a family disagreement. It could be evidence of financial exploitation and elder abuse. Carlton told us not to contact Marisol and not to warn her about the recordings. He wanted to involve the Elder Fraud Unit and build the case quietly. Before he left, he looked at me and said, "Hollis, if these recordings are authentic, Marisol has no idea how much trouble she is already in." But then Eleanor remembered something else. She looked toward the bedroom and whispered, "There is one more recording, and that one explains why she was so desperate to get our house." Eleanor slowly reached behind the dresser and pulled out the second recording. She had hidden it because she was afraid Marisol would find it. Carlton connected the recorder to his laptop, and we listened in silence. This recording was different. Marisol was speaking to Daniel and telling him that once the house was transferred into her name, she could sell it and use the money to clear her own debts. Daniel sounded shocked and asked why she had not told him about the retirement account. Marisol laughed and said Eleanor was too frightened to understand what was happening. Then she said something that made me feel sick. She had planned to convince Eleanor that I had abandoned her so Eleanor would sign anything placed in front of her. Carlton immediately told us that this recording could become crucial evidence because it showed intent and financial motive. He contacted Deputy Reyes from the Elder Fraud Unit and arranged a private meeting. We handed over the recordings, bank statements, security footage, and every document Marisol had made Eleanor sign. Deputy Reyes listened carefully and asked us not to confront Marisol under any circumstances. He said they needed to verify the financial records and determine whether anyone else was involved. That night, Eleanor finally broke down in my arms. She told me she had spent 3 weeks believing I had stopped loving her. I held her and told her that none of this was her fault. She had been manipulated by someone she trusted. The next morning, Deputy Reyes called with an update. Investigators had found evidence connecting Marisol to the unauthorized withdrawal and the home equity paperwork. But then he told us something unexpected. Marisol had already scheduled another meeting at our bank, and this time, she was planning to take control of far more than our money. The next morning, Deputy Reyes called and told us that Marisol had scheduled a meeting with the bank to request additional access to our accounts. She planned to claim that Eleanor was no longer capable of managing her own finances and that she had been given authority to act on her behalf. Carlton immediately contacted the bank and provided the documents proving that Eleanor had never willingly given Marisol such authority. We decided not to cancel the meeting. Instead, Deputy Reyes wanted Marisol to walk into the bank believing her plan was still working. Eleanor was terrified, but she agreed to cooperate. For the first time since I had returned from Tulsa, I saw strength returning to her face. She told me, "Hollis, I want her to know that she did not break me." We arranged for the investigators to monitor the meeting while Carlton stayed nearby. Marisol arrived at the bank carrying a folder filled with documents. She told the bank employee that Eleanor was confused and that she needed immediate control of the accounts. She even presented paperwork claiming that Eleanor had authorized her to manage the property. But the bank employee asked her to wait while they verified the documents. Minutes later, Deputy Reyes entered the room with another investigator. Marisol looked shocked when she saw them. She asked why the Elder Fraud Unit was there. Deputy Reyes calmly placed the documents on the table and told her that they had evidence of unauthorized withdrawals, financial coercion, and attempts to take control of our home. Marisol immediately started denying everything. She said Eleanor had willingly signed the papers. Then Deputy Reyes played one of Eleanor's recordings. Marisol heard her own voice threatening Eleanor, and her expression completely changed. She stopped talking. Carlton then placed the security footage on the table and showed her taking food from our refrigerator and preventing our neighbor from checking on Eleanor. Marisol finally realized that every lie she had told us was documented. But just when I thought it was over, Deputy Reyes looked at me and said, "Hollis, there is one more person we need to question." Eleanor slowly took the recorder from the table and pressed play. At first there was only silence, followed by Marisol's voice speaking to someone inside our house. I listened carefully as she explained that she needed our property because she had serious debts that she could not pay. Then she mentioned a private lender who was threatening her and said the equity in our house could solve everything. My heart sank. She had not only been taking money from Eleanor, she had been planning to use our home to save herself. But then Marisol said something that made the room go completely silent. She told the person on the recording that once Eleanor was declared unable to manage her finances, she could gain even more control over the property. I looked at Carlton and he immediately told us that this recording could be extremely important. He contacted Deputy Reyes from the Elder Fraud Unit and arranged a private meeting. When Deputy Reyes listened to everything, he asked us not to confront Marisol under any circumstances. He explained that the best way to protect the case was to let her continue. Believing that Eleanor and I knew nothing, we followed his instructions. For several days, we acted as though everything was normal. Marisol continued calling Eleanor and pretending to be concerned about her. She had no idea that every conversation was now being documented. Meanwhile, Deputy Reyes investigated the bank withdrawals and discovered that the $22,000 had already been transferred into an account connected to Marisol. The $40,000 home equity line was also being prepared for another withdrawal. The evidence was becoming stronger every day. Then Deputy Reyes called me late one evening and said they had found something even more serious. Marisol had apparently contacted someone at a local office and asked about taking legal control of Eleanor's finances. I felt sick hearing it, but Deputy Reyes told me not to worry. They were ready to move forward. Then he said, "Hollis, tomorrow we are going to let her make one more mistake." The next morning, Deputy Reyes arranged everything carefully. He wanted Marisol to believe that she still had control over the situation. Carlton prepared the legal documents, while Eleanor and I stayed inside the house and followed every instruction. Around noon, Marisol arrived carrying a folder. She smiled at Eleanor and acted as if nothing had happened. Then she told her that there was one final document she needed to sign because the bank was asking for additional paperwork. Eleanor pretended to be confused and asked if she could read it later. Marisol became impatient and told her that waiting could cause them to lose the house. I was standing in another room listening through the recording device while Deputy Reyes monitored everything. Marisol then made the mistake we had been waiting for. She admitted that she had already arranged for someone to review the home equity paperwork and that once Eleanor signed, the money could be released quickly. She also said that Hollis would never understand what was happening because he trusted his family too much. I felt anger rising inside me, but I stayed silent. Marisol placed the document on the table and pushed a pen toward Eleanor. Eleanor picked it up, then deliberately dropped it on the floor. While Marisol bent down to get it, Deputy Reyes entered the house with another investigator. Marisol froze. She looked at them, then at Eleanor, and finally at me as I walked into the room. Her face completely changed. She realized that we had known everything. Deputy Reyes calmly told her that she was being investigated for financial exploitation and coercion. Marisol immediately started denying everything, but Carlton placed copies of the bank records and recordings on the table. Her excuses disappeared one by one. Then Deputy Reyes showed her the security footage of her removing food from our refrigerator and blocking our neighbor from checking on Eleanor. Marisol became silent. But there was still one thing none of us expected. Deputy Reyes received a phone call, stepped outside for a moment, and returned with a serious expression. He looked at me and said, "Hollis, we just found out where the missing $22,000 went." The final recording was the one that changed everything. Eleanor pressed play, and Marisol's voice filled the room. She was speaking to someone about our house, explaining that if she could get Eleanor to sign enough documents, she could eventually claim a financial stake in the property. Then she mentioned that she needed the money because she had serious debts and believed our house could solve all her problems. I looked at Carlton, and he immediately told us that this recording could become a major part of the case. The next morning, he contacted Deputy Reyes from the Elder Fraud Unit. We gave them the recordings, bank statements, security footage, and every document Marisol had convinced Eleanor to sign. Deputy Reyes listened carefully and told us they had enough evidence to begin building a criminal case, but they warned us not to confront Marisol. She still believed Eleanor was frightened and that I knew nothing about what had happened. We decided to let her believe that. For the next several days, Eleanor and I acted as though everything was normal. Marisol continued calling and asking about the house and the money. She even offered to help us fix our financial problems. Meanwhile, investigators traced the $22,000 withdrawal and discovered where the money had gone. They also confirmed that the $40,000 home equity line had been opened using documents Eleanor had signed under pressure. Then Deputy Reyes called us with news. They had enough evidence to move forward. The plan was to arrest Marisol at her workplace without warning her. I felt relieved, but Eleanor was still struggling emotionally. She kept blaming herself for signing the papers. I held her hand and told her that she had been manipulated and frightened, and none of this was her fault. 2 days later, Deputy Reyes called again. He told me the arrest was happening that afternoon. I looked at Eleanor and realized that after weeks of fear, we were finally about to take our lives back. But there was one thing I did not expect. Before the arrest, Marisol made one final phone call to Eleanor, and what she said revealed just how far she was willing to go. The final call came just before Marisol was arrested. She told Eleanor that if she spoke to anyone about the money or the house, she would make sure. The whole family turned against her. Eleanor stayed calm and kept the call going while the investigators listened from another room. Then Marisol said something that became the final piece of evidence the investigators needed. She admitted that she had taken the money and pressured Eleanor because she believed Hollis would never discover the truth until it was too late. That afternoon, Deputy Reyes and the Elder Fraud Unit arrested Marisol at her workplace. She was completely shocked. She had believed she had controlled the situation, but she never knew that Eleanor had been recording her. Later, Marisol pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. Daniel was devastated when he finally learned everything his wife had done while he was unaware. He filed for divorce, telling me that he could not continue living with someone who had treated his own mother that way. For Eleanor, the healing took much longer. She had lost weight, confidence, and trust, but slowly. She began returning to the woman she had been before Marisol entered our home. We restored our finances, closed the home equity line, and secured every account. The garden that had been abandoned for weeks slowly came back to life too. One morning, Eleanor stood beside me in the garden and said, "Hollis, I thought I had lost everything." I held her hand and told her, "You did not lose everything. You still have me." What happened taught me something I will never forget. Sometimes the person you trust to protect your family can become the person who hurts them the most. But truth has a way of finding its way into the light. Marisol tried to take our money, our home, and Eleanor's sense of security, but she could not take away our love for each other. And after everything we had been through, Eleanor and I knew that our home was finally safe again.